Professor Shaul Kelner, who is Associate Professor of Sociology and Jewish Studies at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. He's also the author of Tours That Bind, Diaspora, Pilgrimage, and Israeli Birthright Tourism. And he's currently working on a book about the American campaign to free Soviet Jews. And finally, we're joined from Israel by Naama Klar, who is the director of the Koret International School for Jewish Studies at ANU, the Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv. That's formerly the Diaspora Museum. Before that, she was the deputy CEO of the Reut Group, an Israeli think tank that diagnoses and tackles strategic threats to Israel that are ignored by the national leadership, including the relationship between Israel and the diaspora, and her field of expertise is Jewish peoplehood in Israel. Thank you for joining us. I want to just set out and say that we first conceived of this session about the changing relationship between U.S. Jews and Israel before the current turmoil ushered in by the movement to bring judicial reform to Israel and the mass protest movement that set off. So even before that, those events and the context of what's happening now in recent weeks, the relationship between U.S. Jews and Israel has been changing. We're going to talk about some of those long-term trends. But first, I would love to hear a little bit from Naama about what the feeling is in Israel these days. We've all been reading the news stories and watching the protests from afar, in some cases from close. And I'd love to hear a little bit from you about what the feeling is. Is it a feeling of, are people feeling despair? Are they feeling optimism? Are they feeling danger? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would say with pleasure, but it actually makes me pretty sad to share this, but I'm going to share it quite honestly. The mood is pretty grim. Everyone are kind of sad and on the edge, and there's even a little bit of a violent mode in the street. People has no patience for each other. Everyone has an opinion on what's going on. I guess the people who joined us today has seen that kind of the opinion are quite divided according to tribal affiliation within the Jewish Israeli society, and so everyone has really strong opinions, even if they're not familiar enough with the details. And it's clear for everyone that in the upcoming days, there is going to be some moment in time that will be very dramatic, of some sort of either decision-making or avoiding making a decision. And that will have huge effect on the future of Israel, not only impacting the balance of different authorities, which is the legal issue, but also on the way that the Israeli society would define itself and make choices in the future. So very dramatic times. People are generally pretty pessimistic, and it doesn't even matter if you support the reform or you're objecting it. And there's some sort of desperation that no external threat could have created. So that pretty much sums it up. It's everything everyone are talking about all the time. And if you dare to talk about anything else, you feel like it's some sort of an escapism or stupidity. And that sums it up.
Felissa, this is a bit of a strange moment, I feel, or maybe an inflection point in the relationship between U.S. Jews and Israel, because traditionally, when the U.S. Jewish community has been motivated to action, it's been to assist Israel unconditionally in various ways, whether there's some war or some fundraising campaign or Aliyah from Ethiopia. In this case, American Jews are being asked to some extent to take a position against the Israeli government. To what extent do you think the U.S. Jewish community is engaged in this, or is it more something that's happening on the organizational and institutional level among the leadership, and the people are taking more of a wait and see approach?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think that, for example, our readership of our stories presents a really mixed picture. Some, there are moments where people are tuning in, they want to understand what is happening in Israel. They know something big is happening. And also, the daily drama, I think, is not 100% on the, American Jews are not following along for the daily drama necessarily. But I think my sense is, and it will be interesting to see, in the future, if we get polling or other evidence of this, my sense is that this is a moment of great attention by American Jews, that and great affinity, not necessarily of a particular form, but we're really seeing and experiencing American Jews feeling like this thing that's happening in this other country, I have a stake in it. It's about me too. And I think that's been a question about the US-Israel relationship, is how much do American Jews, feel that, and is that attenuating over time? And I think depending on one's attitude, you can find evidence for any kind of narrative. And I think what we see in this moment is like, this feels like our story and we have a stake in it. And, we ought to understand it to some degree. And I think there's the additional American, perspective of like, we have an idea of what democracy should look like. And we're understanding the ways in which Israeli democracy is not the same as the democracy we're used to. And that, is adding a new set of ways to think about the relationship. So I think, Naama, the way you're describing it, this is on everyone's mind all the time. Look, my engagement on a daily basis is with engaged Jews who are engaging with Jewish news, or in my own personal life who are, engaged with a synagogue community. I'm seeing the same thing. Like, this is before you talk about anything else. It's like, what do you make of what happened? Maybe not today, but what do you make of what happens every week? We all know that every week Israelis are in the streets, and that this is seems to be the biggest protest movement in Israeli history, and that it's not letting up. And we've all seen the pictures. So I think it's very present for many American Jews.
Thank you. I also want to encourage people who are listening in to send in your own questions or comments in the chat window. A couple of people have made the point that it's not everybody in the U.S., of course, sees this issue from the same side. There are those who support the judicial reform in the Israeli government, and there are those who oppose it. And that's, of course, very important to note. When I look at some of the survey data over the medium term in the last 3 or 4 years on American Jewish engagement in Israel, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There's the Pew survey from 2021 showed that around 80% of American Jews care about Israel and say that it's an important or essential part of what being Jewish means to them. Yet a survey from that same year showed that only 62% feel emotionally attached to Israel and 38% do not. Shaul, I know that you've done research on American Jewish attachment to Israel and visiting Israel. Slightly less than half of American Jews report having visited Israel at least once. What do you make of the importance of visiting Israel to the way that American Jews engage with the country? And what are some of the other ways that you think about engagement when you think about what does it mean to be engaged in Israel?
Yeah, certainly. Well, and if I could just add one point about the American Jewish conversation about what's happening right now. Remember that we have coming up very soon Passover, and that is the main time when American Jews gather with each other around their tables to have conversations about things Jewish. And so I think that right now, to the extent that there's a conversation, people are having them in isolation. But the conversation about what's happening in Israel is going to come into American Jewish homes in a very large way next month. And we'll see what happens in Israel, what that's going to shape the way that unfolds. So I think that may be an inflection point also in American Jewish conversations. But if you want to go back and think about modes of engagement, slightly under half, don't say slightly under half as if that's a low thing. If you compare homeland tourism of American Jews to Israel versus Irish Americans to Ireland or Italian Americans to Italy or almost any other ethnic group that does not have recent immigration ties to the country, American Jews are off the charts high in terms of homeland travel. Now, that is not just because American Jews are choosing individually to travel. It's not just a matter of affluence, it's that the American Jewish community has actually prioritized travel as a communal way of encouraging people to get engaged. And so when we think about modes of engagement and the ways in which Jewish Americans connect, we can think about it on two levels. We can think about it as a grassroots phenomenon that bubbles up, that American Jewish attachments are reflective generally of the sentiment, what's in the kishkas, what's in the hearts of American Jews. Or we can think about it in terms of how the American Jewish community organizes to encourage connections with Israel. And there are connections between them, but they're really two separate things. American Jews as a community have encouraged a number of modes of engagement, including travel, including philanthropy, including learning and study, including consuming food, music, what have you. So it's a very, very rich and robust relationship with a lot of different levels of ties.
Staying on that point for a moment, where do you see this moving when we look at statistics of younger American Jews? They're not only less engaged with Israel, but less engaged with institutional Jewish life. Yet a staggeringly large proportion of American Jews have gone on Birthright Israel, which is not only about connecting American Jews with Israel, but about connecting American Jews with their own fellow Jews and with their heritage. When you think about the 20 to 40 or whatever the cohort is for younger Jews, do you see the American Jewish community moving in a particular direction, either away from, toward engagement with Israel, or is it too early to say?
It depends on which young American Jews you're talking about. We're seeing growth in at two different ends. We're seeing a growth in the Haredi population in the States, and we're seeing a growth in what the sociologists will call Jews of no religion, but no Jew of no religion actually calls themselves that. It's a sociological concept. Basically, and you're seeing opposite trends. So you have a very engaged Haredi population, dual citizenship, back and forth travel, a lot of family ties, and that's growing. And you're seeing a general disengagement in all forms of Jewish affiliation among the so-called Jews of no religion. So really, it's a question. If you're talking about the center, and the non-Orthodox synagogue, federation, JCC affiliated populations that have been the mainstay of Jewish American engagement with Israel, that's shrinking, and we're seeing two trends on the opposite sides.
And I wonder, from the people who are participating in this call who have children or grandchildren who are in that cohort, whether you have a sense that they are more or less interested, involved with Israel and Jewish life than you. I'd love to hear your comments. We've talked so much up to now about how American Jews feel about Israel. What about how Israeli Jews feel about the diaspora, and American Jews in particular, to the extent that they think about them? Naama, give us a sense about how aware are Israeli Jews about the issues that American Jews grapple with, and how they think about the tfutzot, the diaspora.
Okay, so we're diving into some sort of a blind spot in the Israeli identity. So I'm gonna explain it from the bird's eye view. Is that okay?
Great.
So by and large, Israelis have very strong and warm emotions towards world Jewry. And it's quite consistent, and you don't see tremendous age differences. So a common Israeli that is a Jew has a positive emotional or approach to world Jewry, and American Jewry is included. The problem is that for many years now, for over 100 years, the conceptual component that creates the Israeli attitude towards world Jewry is negation of diaspora. Maybe it sounds weird, but it's actually a conceptual component from the classical Zionism. It's been around for a long time. I think Brenner was the thought leader that really set the term negation of diaspora, in Hebrew, shlilat hagalut. And this concept basically means that diaspora life is a temporary, unwanted reality that's about to dissolve, to completely disappear sometime in the near future. And when they had this as a component in the classical Zionism, a very small minority of the Jewish people was actually here in Israel, but nevertheless, that was a very central component. So everything around world Jewry was an outcome of this component, such as kibbutz galuyot, gathering the diaspora, and even, share your bread with a new ole, a newcomer, because kibbutz galuyot, as a result of negation of diaspora, is a central component of your values as a Zionist. And I also believe that it had a very important role in creating the society here. So maybe it has some sort of a historic role or justification. Nowadays, it's just an inertia. It does not serve the Zionist movement or concept anymore. It's a liability, but it's very, very hard to replace it. As a result of the component of negation of diaspora, a common Israeli that sees itself as a Zionist, as a Jew, will have 3 prisms on world Jewry, US Jewry almost included, with the exception of seeing them as a strategic asset for the state of Israel because of the special relationship with the US. And these 3 prisms are ignorance. So a common Israeli wouldn't know a lot on American Jews, not even the numbers or, the percentage that they represent from the Jewish people. They will know nothing, even if something very dramatic happens, unless it's a terror attack, which I'll explain in a minute, they wouldn't know a thing. Secondly, they're indifferent. By and large, if something's happening, it's a non-issue. It wouldn't hit the newspaper. It would not be spoken of. And thirdly, they feel some sort of superiority. So it's a bit blunt. I'm sorry to be very direct, but they see themselves as better Jews just because they're in Israel and not outside of it. And if an Israeli would leave, they would call it yored, which is descending, it's an insulting word, and it's being used like normally, not even as an insulting word.
Naama, when you mention those 3 elements, the thing that strikes me is that those are almost the same ways that American Jews think about European Jews. For the most part, they don't really think about European Jews at all. When they do, it's when there's, God forbid, a terrorist attack or some crisis. And I think there also is this sense of superiority, not in that that American Jews are better than European Jews, but are in a more fortunate situation, that there's less anti-Semitism in America than there is in Europe, that American Jews don't have to build their Jewish life on the ashes of the burial grounds of the Holocaust. So it's kind of, it's interesting. I often use that to try to remind American Jews how little Israelis think about them. It's how little they think about Europeans. Felissa and Shaul, do you think that American Jews have a sense of what's happening with Israeli people, or have people-to-people relationships? And this is a question for Naama too. Or is Israel more of like a Jewish Disneyland? American tourists come and they visit, and obviously a lot of people have family ties, but are there real people-to-people relationships between these 2 communities? That's a question for any and all of you.
I mean, there certainly are. And one of those ways is through the Emissary program of the Israeli government, which, if you're already engaged through Jewish federations, or your kids are in school, Jewish day school, or you are in a big metro area, like, you will encounter these emissaries. And I think that that's a meaningful thing for the people who do encounter them, right? I think that that brings a sense of spirit and excitement and humanity to culture and celebration. And in this moment, I'll just say for my own community, like, someone to ask questions to who will have an informed perspective, that you can feel like you can cut through the noise and hear from a person. Of course, lots of American Jews, though I don't know what the proportion is, and maybe Shaul, you have a sense, but lots of American Jews have Israelis in their families, and many do not. And then I think that there's I don't know how it all fits in, but like a cultural kind of, American Jews and non-Jews are eating Israeli food, watching Israeli TV, in a way that, that I think that's been going on, but it really is prominent in the culture. And so there's a point of connection there as well. Shaul, I'm curious if you have other insight.
One of the interesting things about this is that even with Birthright Israel, for example, where you're getting American Jews who are going to Israel, the educators who are running the program are worried that you're putting Americans on a tour bus and they're only seeing a symbolic Israel, and they're not really getting to know actual Israelis. And so they build into the program what they call mifgash, meeting, encounter, where they bring 10 Israelis, same age as the participants, onto the bus. So it's no longer that you have that bus window dividing the foreign tourist from the native, the local Israeli, but they're actually on the same side. They're looking at the country together. They're talking with each other. But even with that, one of the things that was fascinating to me that I found when I was doing the research was there's a lot of excitement. These are young 20-somethings, and they want to hook up with each other. And they're talking about, I want to hook up with an Israeli or with an American. So even in this moment where they're supposed to be getting to know each other as individuals, they're still seeing each other as symbols. So the notion of Israel as a symbol versus Israel as a real place is incredibly important for American Jewish relationships with Israel, and it's very, very hard to break down, even in the moments where you're really, really trying to create one-to-one personal relationships.
And I don't have a stake in this. I'm a journalist covering these dynamics, but a question that I often ask is like, Israel is a symbol, and like that's kind of, it is the symbol that's like kept the Jewish people together. And what do we gain and lose by pushing ourselves to engage with Israel as a place filled with real people and Israel as a symbol, and hold those two things together? I think that is a challenging idea. And I don't know, it's a question that I often have, and I think it maybe will open interesting conversation. It often does when I ask it.
And tying into what Naama said, there is an asymmetry in the relationship, because Israel is a symbol for American Jews. Diaspora Jew is not a symbol for Israelis. That structures that relationship.
One of the things that struck me about the ANU, the Museum of the Jewish People where Naama works, and which has been completely transformed over the last 5 years, is that it is one of the only places in Israel where Israelis can encounter the nuances of diaspora Jewish life, to really learn about American Jews, to learn about what they are. And it is interesting because I wonder how much opportunity there is for Israelis to do that, and how much interest there is, whether it's in schools or even the large Israeli diaspora community that lives in the United States. Often the first generation will not engage with American Jewish life at all, only up to a point when their kids start to reach bar mitzvah age and they realize that they're looking for some kind of Jewish environment. But in what ways are Israelis able to engage with American Jews or to learn about the American Jewish community, Naama, aside from those mifgashim that Shaul mentioned on Birthright?
Yeah, so just to tap on mifgashim, the Sapir Center has a very interesting research. I think the final claim is that in mifgashim, 96% are American Jews and only like 4% are Israelis. So Israelis has less opportunity to meet non-Israeli Jews. And I think for many years, you didn't really had a chance to even be exposed to this issue of the Jewish people as a real people. But it has been changing for a few years now. I think starting in 2017, there are more new opportunities for the Israeli leadership to meet Jews from around the world. through like a reverse birthright initiatives that are being funded by Federation, but also with Israeli government funds. And it's also growingly becoming an educational issue in the Mamlachti, the general sector education, and also in the national religious education. I don't know if you're aware, but it's completely separate systems. Both of them has new access to being educated on the issue under the word that we, the professionals, are using, Jewish peoplehood. In Hebrew, it's Amiyut Yehudit. Just to make it clear that we're not talking about Judaism as a religion and not on the Israeli nationality. So you have new opportunities. For example, next week there is the Diaspora Week, Shvuat Futzot, happening all around Israel with really cool stuff. We personally at ANU has a Jewish stand-up night. And you have like lots of really, really fun things around Israel, including in the periphery. And it's a new thing, only exists in this form for the second year. Funnily enough, it's completely Israeli. So no input from World Jury on Diaspora Week. But it's new, and like this, you have new opportunities and endeavors happening in Israel. I think most of them are less than 4 years old. So
why do you think that this is a relatively new phenomenon? I mean, even the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs is one of the youngest of the Israeli ministries. Do you think this has been prompted by something in particular, Naama?
So I think the Kotel crisis of 2017 was some sort of awakening moment for the Israeli leadership, because it's been building up for a while before. But I think many devoted Israeli leaders understood at that particular moment, on June 25th, 2017, that Israel cannot serve as the Jewish homeland for the entire Jewish people in the same ancient ways it's been doing it for decades. And they have to wake up and start to figure out, what does it mean for Israel to be the Jewish homeland? For us, the Israeli leadership, to be a part of the bigger Jewish people. And I think these questions had been gaining importance and audiences in Israel starting 2017. This is from my own perspective. But I can tell you that I moved from a very small think tank that is highly aware of Israel diaspora issue and Jewish peoplehood. And when I moved looking for a national platform to promote Jewish peoplehood, I had plenty choices that were all new. ANU is the ancient one, but at least 4 other platforms that are completely new in the field that did not exist 5 years ago.
That's fascinating. One of the touchier issues in the relationship between U.S. Jews and Israel is what role, if any, U.S. Jews should have in Israeli affairs, whether informal or formal. And I'm curious to hear from Felissa in your role as a news person, and also Shaul and Naama, whether you think that there is change here. A previous diaspora minister, a couple of ministers ago, suggested that there be some kind of formal body to weigh in on Israeli affairs. Israel is the state of the Jewish people, but it's also the state of its citizens. To what degree should U.S. Jews have a role in Israeli affairs?
To me, this is a kind of an artificial question. Like, that should they not? Like, the conversation exists, and I think we see deep ambivalence from within Israeli leadership about the answer to this question. Right? We see contemporary leaders saying, "Our voters voted. We don't. You can say what you want, but our voters voted, and we're going to listen to that." And also doing an English language campaign to try to sell their agenda. We don't need your money. Of course, the ask is still there, right? The ambivalence is really there. We want you to feel a stake in this project because we want you to move here, and also we disdain your whatever you think if it's not what I think. So that I think that all of that is very present and can be felt and seen for anyone who's looking. I think what we're seeing in this moment is a departure from some norms or habits by institutional American and diaspora groups that have said, oh, we're only going to comment, on the Kotel issue. We're only going to comment on issues of religious pluralism because that's the only thing that matters to us. And saying, actually, we see the ways in which other issues in Israel cannot be disentangled from religious pluralism issues. And we accept and are going to start commenting on some of the moral dynamics of the occupation, maybe that we wanted Israel to figure it out and we're going to stick to our lane. I think we see that disintegrating in this moment. Whether that's going to be a lasting change is a real question. But I think we've seen American Jewish groups take stands that are out of line with what they said they would have done in the past.
Shaul, you have studied American Jewish movements on other issues like Soviet Jews. Are there some lessons for what happened then to what we might see and what we're seeing now?
Sure, I think one of the biggest ones is that American Jews have always staked out their own independent political position, regardless of what the Israeli government wanted or thought American Jews should do. The big fight in the Soviet Jewry movement came in the 1970s and then again in the 1980s over the issue of so-called dropouts, noshrim, where Soviet Jews were able to leave the USSR on Israeli visas, but were then choosing to go to the United States, to West Germany, to Canada, to other places once they had left the country. And the Israeli government went ballistic on that. And American Jews said, listen, freedom of choice is a fundamental core American value. We are Americans, and we cannot tell other people that they have to live in a certain country. Isn't this whole movement about giving people the right to live where they want? And the Israeli government had a very different perspective, and there was a big fight. And American Jews, who at the same time were going up against their own government because the Nixon White House had policies that American Jews thought of as very bad for Soviet Jews, they opposed the Nixon government. They opposed the Israeli government. The Americans are an independent political actor, and at various times in their history, they've had more of a self-awareness of that. The question of whether American Jews have a right or should have a voice in Israeli politics, the American Jews have made their choice. And go back to the 1950s when the Orthodox groups in the United States were opposing the draft of religious women into the army and were, I believe, proposing boycotts of Sim, the shipping company, because it was serving non-kosher food. So these debates go back a long time. I'll say they are probably debates from the Israeli side. From the American side, American Jews are taking their stand. Sometimes they're doing it via protest. Sometimes they're voting with their dollars. They're giving philanthropy to the Israeli NGOs that are supporting the values that they want to see in Israel, and they're circumventing the government by working through civil society.
Also, when we think about wedge issues, Naama brought up the Kotel crisis of 2017, and now we have this judicial reform crisis. Although I don't know if that's a crisis between U.S. Jews and Israel. And then of course there's the ongoing issue of the Palestinians, which is a wedge issue. Survey data shows that the younger American Jews are more progressive on the Palestinian issue, more sympathetic to the Palestinians, less sympathetic to the Israelis. To what extent do you think, and this is a question for all of you, is the Palestinian issue a growing or a problem for the relationship between the two communities? Phyllis, I'm going to have to put you on the spot because you're the news person.
Fine. I mean, I don't know that is it growing or not growing. It's a problem, right? It's a real issue. And I think that one gap that, to the extent that anyone in either place cares, right? Like lots of people are disengaged. Lots of Jewish people in both countries are disengaged from this question. but many people are engaged. I sort of lost my train of thought. I think that look, Birthright has sent a lot of people to Israel, right? It is dramatically smaller than it has been. The reasons for that are multiple. One is that a core funder is diverse, not in the position to fund in the same way, but also, I can just say highly anecdotally that my extremely centrist, not politically engaged, a relative of mine who is in the demographic said, I would never go. I understand that that's not, that it's a toxic kind of, even with efforts to rehabilitate and show a more real Israel, introduce more Israelis, that there's a real impact, I think, of the campaign to say Birthright is presenting a whitewashed view of what Israel is to American Jews. And I think that matters. I think that we do see, concern in the data. I think that that's not a bad thing, right? That's a level of engagement with Israel. So not all engagement has to be like, rainbows and puppies. It's real engagement and moral investment to be troubled. I do think this moment is illuminating for American Jews the degree to which this topic, which I think does feel present in conversations about Israel and the US, hasn't necessarily been in daily life for many Israelis, and that's breaking through. And I think that there's an awareness for those who are tuned in that we're at a pivotal moment, and that this idea that I think remains the official American position, and I think the ambition of many American Jews, that there could be a two-state solution. If that was ever in reach, it's about that moment may end, and this moment could bring that to an end. And I think that that's all on everyone's mind. I think it's all present. I don't know if that means it's a problem.
Naama, go ahead. Looks like you want to say something.
Well, I think this second of silence tells the entire story. We all know it's an issue. It's such a heavy issue. We feel disempowered to even engage with it. I think plenty of the people who view this issue understand that it's not completely in our hands anyways, unlike, by the way, the Kotel, because it's our decision, right? No one can. There is another side to it. I do think that there is potentially a maturity moment, because for many, I'm sorry if it sounds too blunt, for many years, the two-state solution as even a slogan was a component was a way out for American Jews to tackle difficult issues about Israel. The future, or maybe even a solution, would not necessarily look like it. And yet, since so much weight had been put on this slogan, it's really hard to replace it or reduce its importance. I think we've seen it when actually AIPAC wouldn't take it out of the platform when the Israeli government 3 years ago was about to take it, didn't put it in its own platform because it's more important for them than the Israeli government sometimes. I think that we must engage with this topic with a lot of maturity. The Palestinian issue is not the only complex issue in Israel. You have many other issues that will not be perfect in the future to come. Some of it are more under our control even, and yet. So I think it's definitely an issue, not necessarily changing according to reality. Like if things get better or worse, it doesn't necessarily change the effect that the Palestinian issue has on American Jews' engagement with Israelis, because it's just there. Those are my thoughts.
Ron Dermer, who is a part of this close ally of Netanyahu and has been his ambassador to the United States, said a couple of years ago, well, we don't really care about what US Jews think about us. They're not that important for us. What really, the group that we really care about are the Christians the evangelical Christians in America. They're our real friends. They are far larger in number than American Jews. Their support matters a lot more. And I think that there's this dismissive sense that some Israelis have of American Jews, particularly when it comes to security issues. Like, okay, you want to talk to us about how to do aliyah and absorption, fine, but we're not going to have conversations with you about security issues. Do you see this? Do you see this the same way? And this is a question for all of you. Shaul, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll take that. Again, it's a political assessment, and American Jews for most of their history have tried a strategy of maintaining bipartisan consensus around Israel, removing Israel from American partisan politics, and that strategy has broken down. It broke down about 30 years ago, and as America has grown more polarized and partisan, it's been next to impossible to keep Israel out of that. Essentially, what you're seeing in the States is that you have American Jews who vote heavily Democratic, aligning with the progressive factions in Israel, and you have American Jews in the Orthodox communities who vote primarily Republican, aligning with the more conservative factions in Israel. And it's a two-way street. And I think that Dermer's quotation indicates that. And it's a conservative Israeli government that is recognizing that its natural allies in the States are in the Republican Party. And it's a Christian evangelical constituency in that. So it's a dangerous situation because governments change. And if you're aligning with one party in the States, well, when the other party gets in power, then you're going to have some problems. And American Jews tried valiantly for a very long time to avoid that type of a situation. But because of general changes in America becoming more polarized, and because of changes in Israel really working against that strategy, it's put us in a situation where you're having blue state alignment with progressives and red state alignment with conservatives in Israel.
I'm not sure it is a dangerous proposition in the way you're describing, because even if Republicans are out of power in the US, they still have resources, and we've seen that, right? Resources coming from those supporters that are flowing to the right in Israel during a Democratic administration and heavily influencing and paving the way for policy initiatives. So, you know, if you're a right-wing Israeli leader, I don't know what the political risks are. It does strike me, again, not a historian, that like throwing the Jewish people's lot in with evangelicals, like there are some competing interests. I don't know that we have examples of that like lasting for a long time. But you know, I think both of the evangelical community is different from is a powerhouse and different from anything really that has come before it too. So, and I think it's, you know, there's not a risk because there may not be a risk because it's hard to see in Israel demographically how, you know, if the right falls out of power, how resources from the evangelicals in the US don't help them, you know, regain it. So I'm not sure about that risk. I do think and I think that this moment actually is a really instrumental one in helping American Jews who may not have been paying attention to this dynamic understand the extent to which non-Jewish attention is shaping what is happening in Israel.
I also wonder to what extent demographics play a role in this, but Naama, you had a comment.
Yeah, I just want to say that I completely agree with Shaul, and I do not agree with Felissa that I think it's a real danger, not just because it compromises our national security, because bipartisan support is a source of strength and resiliency for this tiny state, but because of a more fundamental reason. Israel is not just any state that needs to survive and maximize its interests. It's the homeland of the Jewish people, and it's not just words, it has a meaning. And if this state do not have internal legitimacy from the Jewish people, we're going back to square one, where pioneers of the Zionist movement and Herzl went around Europe and gaining zero support from within the Jewish people. Internal legitimacy matters to a much bigger extent than we can expect, not just because of our security and interest vis-a-vis the US, because the Zionist aspiration was to create a homeland that will secure our joint future and will strengthen us as a people, not just the percent that lives here, never the percent that lives here, our people entirely. And if we're not doing that, we're not fulfilling the Zionist vision. And we're just about to celebrate our 75th Independence Day. And there's a lot of confusion around it. So Israelis are celebrating cherry tomatoes and Iron Dome. And, it's okay. It's not the story. The story is creating a meaningful homeland for the Jewish people. This is the celebration. We're talking about cherry tomatoes because we got so far and remoted from our sources, from our roots. And I think this is a real danger. It's a daily danger. Our work at ANO is engaging this blind spot, this vacuum in educational instruments, of course, just because if we're not doing this, the state of Israel will not necessarily continue to be on the historical root of the Jewish people. And this is a real task. So I think it's a huge danger, and Ron Dermer is exactly representing this blind spot.
I want to just clarify that I was not saying that I think there's no danger, but that if I'm a right-wing Israeli leader, I don't think the risk that for a few years Democrats will be in power in the US means that I shouldn't ally myself with the evangelicals. I wonder though, Naama, you're talking about the celebration of Zionist spirit and the triumph of the Zionist ideal. And I just don't know if is that like where everyone is, because I think that there's the sense also that as we're a mature country in that we can be like every other country and have our political crises and show our might and be divided, and that's a sign of a maturity too. And again, not my view, but I think I hear that. And I'm curious, kind of like, do you feel like there's a desire to pull together? Like, how, I don't know, what do you see as this as the conversation, or who's in the conversation around who are we at 75?
Yeah. So I'm gonna try and make it with an optimistic end, but the problem is that our agenda is being set by political institutions that their interests will always be much more narrow and sometimes contradicting to the bigger picture of the Jewish people and Jewish continuity in Israel and outside of Israel. So this is where leadership has a very unique role in securing our joint future. We have never, and we cannot now or in the future say that political institutions will secure our togetherness and our future. We have to have other mechanisms, as we had in the past and as we will, Bezrat Hashem, in the future. I think the understanding that I've shared here, that in order to fulfill the Zionist vision, we have to stay one people, and Israel is important because it's the home of this family, of this mishpucha, the Jewish people, is not common enough. I think, Uri, please add if you think, because you're very involved in this field too, but I think a couple of thousands of Israeli leaders understand it and are actually devoting some of their work or their entire life for this purpose. I think we're just coming across a generation where if we're not going to do something active to secure this belonging of the Israelis to the Jewish people, it's not given as granted. And we have to work very hard to make sure it lingers and continue. This current crisis or, an argument coming to some sort of a melting point has something to do with this too, because our togetherness, our joint existence needs solid foundations. It needs very good infrastructure that can hold steady when we disagree, because we'll have many reasons to disagree in the future. And this infrastructure is not strong enough within the Jewish Israeli society. my personal belief is it's because of a weakened Jewish identity. They do not understand the context in which everything is happening, which is making this like arms race of opinions growing beyond what's actually good for us. So I promised an optimistic end. I think the understanding of the Jewish people as the bigger context to what's happening here is growing, maybe not fast enough, but we have very strong partners when we want to move forward, not only in philanthropy and not only outside of Israel, but also within Israeli leadership across all sectors. So
thank you, Naama. Thank you. That was terrific. We only have a couple minutes left. First of all, I want to ask you another question, and I want to thank all the participants for their comments. Clearly, there's a lot of passion here for Israel in a lot of different directions, and I really appreciate your sharing that and keeping it civil. And so, Shaul and Felissa, I would also like to ask you about reasons for optimism and to throw one additional question into the mix, which is, to what extent is the growing Haredi population going to impact the dynamic between U.S. Jews and Israel? 22% of Israel is Orthodox. The proportion is about 10% in the United States. These are in each community the fastest growing communities. In America, it's also the so-called nuns, N-O-N-E, Jews of no religion, as Shaul, you mentioned. But I'm curious both for that question, throwing the Orthodox wrench into this, what is that? Where might that lead us? And do you see, what are some of the bright spots that you see? And then we'll wrap up. Thank you. Shaul, take it away.
Sure. Well, that could be one of the bright spots. The relationship between Orthodox Jews in the States and in Israel is strong and is staying strong. It's staying strong across the generations. So, if you're committed to this broadest notion of Klal Yisrael, seeing connections between any of the segments of the society is something that that you would say, all right, that's a good sign. You could also think about the ways that the economic relationship is solid, and it's said before, that there are so many layers of this relationship: philanthropic, religious, travel, investment, political, cultural, you name it. And when social network analysts try to understand what makes for strong bonds, they look at multi-layered relationships. And so you can pull at one thread, but there are all these other threads that are really weaving American Jews and Israel together. And I think that bodes well for continuing to stay engaged with each other as two communities. There's going to be conflict, and some segments and because we have divided communities, seeing strong relationships between communities who you're not a part of, and I say, oh, I don't want to see things go that way. But that is just that's part of having a robust, multifaceted relationship.
And I would say, I think that the growing Haredi population, not just the population, but the political might, is a real challenge for this relationship, right? Like, of all places that Jews live in the world, Israel is the least free place to be a Jew. And like, that is just a true statement. I have less religious freedom in Israel than I do anywhere else that I might live. And that's true for every Jew. And some Jews like the version of Judaism that, growing political might of the Haredim want to enact. And many Jews, and certainly many Jews in the diaspora, don't. And so I think that's, something that's been talked about, but it's not going away. It's a real issue. And I think a value of the diaspora, certainly a value of Americans, or progressive Americans, of which most American Jews, vote for Democrats, is not to live in a theocracy, right? We don't want that. We've chosen that we don't want that. And there's a real danger that that's the direction that Israeli governance will go. And I think that will be a big impediment that will be experienced a lot and talked about a lot. I also, when we talk about optimism though, like, we saw something that happened last year that is a reminder of why this place exists, and why, despite all the struggle, like we're all, or many of us are committed to it despite the challenges, right? Which was the Ukrainian Jewish rescue, or the permitting and help airlifting Ukrainian Jews and their relatives to come to Israel in a moment of crisis. There hadn't been one of those in a while. God willing, there shouldn't be so many more. But that was a glimpse of I think that core mission. And then there's been some real attenuation and tears in that afterwards, where that opened up discussion about, should we change the law of return to limit it? I think where those conversations go will really matter, and they're happening right now.
And I want to end on my
And to
own.
be clear,
Go ahead, Shaul.
Guys, Phyllis, I agree with you. From my personal position, I agree with you 100%. I would not want to live in a theocracy. I think that the political direction that the Haredi parties would be taking the country is something that, to me, is anathema. But when I'm trying to take that personal hat off and think about a relationship between the communities, I would like to see non-Orthodox American Jews be as engaged politically with Israel as we're seeing in the Haredi community. So if we're saying that ties are good, I don't want to say ties are good, but only for the group that I am a part of. So that's to clarify where I'm standing.
Right. And I would just say that overall, if you do look at the survey data, this is from the Pew Survey of American Jews, 80%, 82% say caring about Israel is an important or essential part of what being Jewish means to them. And that is, a majority of respondents agreed with that statement across all age groups, all religious movements, and all political parties. And on the flip side, 75% of Israeli Jews say they share a common destiny with American Jews, which is actually higher than that of US Jews. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this really fabulous discussion. I learned so much. Thank you, Shaul, Felissa, and Naama, for being with us, and everybody for tuning in. I want to remind you that there are more of these coming, spanning subjects from politics to food. Stay tuned for the Israel at 75 events. There are more coming in April and May, and thank you for tuning in today. Shalom to everybody. Take care.